My name is Pete Woodson, and I started work in the oil field in 1954 after graduating from the University of California at Berkeley with a degree in mechanical engineering. I went to Berkeley actually in '52 after going to Sacramento Junior College for a couple of years and completed my education in Berkeley, my last 2 years in Berkeley. I went to work for Shell Oil Company in 1954 after I interviewed Shell among a number of other companies. And Shell really provided what I thought was the most interesting work of all the companies I talked to. And they talked about drill pipe problems and problems with casing design and this kind of thing in 16,000 foot wells, and that really interested me. When I first went to work for Shell in '54, we were transferred all over California, and I did all kinds of different jobs for Shell, from riding with pumpers to working on well pulling units and working on a drilling rig. And after that year was up, that completed my training program. And at the end of the training program, I was sent to Texas for several months to undergo a thorough course in geology, the geology of Central Texas. And after completing that, I came back to California and was assigned to the Bakersfield office, where I became a drilling engineer, and really worked with a lot of interesting problems in drilling. And I guess it became pretty well known that I was interested in drilling, and in 1957, I was transferred to Ventura and assigned to a job as mud engineer. I was worked as a mud engineer for 2 or 3 years out of Ventura. Actually ran mud on contract rigs and on company rigs. We had at the time 2 company rigs working in Ventura Field and another company rig working in Saticoy Field out near Santa Paula. And I ran the mud on those rigs. We were running a high pH lime mud. And so that's what I became kind of an expert in, is high pH lime muds and also oil-based mud. Our mud plant in Ventura was geared to deal with oil-based mud. And so I dealt with both oil-based and conventional mud systems. Then I became division drilling engineer in about 1959, and at the same time, Shell's activities in the offshore had started to increase, and my interest in that was high, and I let that be known to my boss, and so they loaned me to the offshore division in about 1959. And I worked on the first well Shell ever drilled offshore in the Pacific. We used the CUS-1, which CUS stood for Continental Union Superior Shell, and this rig was a conventional derrick on an old YF freighter barge, and it only pulled doubles. It pulled doubles and laid them down on a pipe wrecker, if you can believe that. And it was a pretty darn good old rig. And we drilled a couple of wells out there with the Cuss 1 and used a new technology that Shell had devised in the mid to late 50s called a Mobot. And the Mobot was an animal that worked on the end of a cable that you lowered into the water. It had propellers and it had a TV camera on top, kind of like a head, you know, and had a hydraulic cylinder for a neck. And so you could fly this thing around in the water on the end of this cable and land it on a track on the outside of a wellhead. And then you could run around the track. And the nose of the Mobot was a hydraulic wrench. And the hydraulic wrench could open and close the master valve and swab valve and all this kind of thing. And it could also operate anything else operable with a socket wrench. Yeah, we did. We made a discovery, and that discovery was what was the name of that field? I can't remember. It's just too long ago. But anyway, Shell went ahead and developed that field as an underwater development project with the wellheads underwater and the production facilities actually underwater, offshore of Gaviota. And in between working for the Marine Division on the Cuss 1, I worked for the Ventura office out in Ventura Field, and did work on a number of projects out there. But my main interest lay at the offshore. And in 1961, I think it was 1961, Alaska had an offshore lease sale, and Shell was extremely successful in bidding on offshore leases in Cook Inlet. And so we contracted with Global Marine, who was a contractor out of Los Angeles. And Global Marine was building a rig called the Cuss 2 in Madisonville, Louisiana. And I went back to Madisonville and kind of supervised some of the construction of that rig in the shipyard, and then came back to Ventura and worked in Ventura and kind of back and forth with the land operations in Ventura and the offshore operations offshore California, while the Glomar 2, or what the Cuss 2 as it was called then, was being completed in Madisonville. Upon completion of the rig, they started building Cuss 3 and contracted it out to a firm that was going to drill over in the Persian Gulf. And they found out that Cuss meant, well, a bad word in Arabic. And so they had to rename the Cuss 3, and they renamed the Cuss 2 also. They gave it Glomar's cable address name, Glomar, like Global Marine. And so Glomar, Cuss 2 became Glomar 2. And we had to change the name on the front of the vessel up here in Cook Inlet. After the rig sailed clear to Cook Inlet, we had to put the welders over the side and grind off the old Cuss 2 label and put the new Glomar 2 name on the side of the hull. In 1962, they set up a group of people, kind of like a task force, to take over the Alaska project and supervise the drilling of wildcats at Cook Inlet. And the manager was a fellow by the name of Robbie Robinson. And Robbie was a kind of an old-time shell manager and one heck of a good hand. And he was really great to work for. So Robbie kind of took us all under his wing and made a crew out of us. And I came up here as a drilling engineer / drilling foreman. I was really excited about it. Yeah, I was excited. It was like a foreign land. It's hard to explain how it felt. It doesn't feel like that anymore. A whole lot different. There was nobody to call up here. I mean, you were working on a rig out there in the middle of Cook Inlet, and there was nobody to help you. I mean, if you turned around and looked for help, you'd be looking at the wall, a blank wall. You know, there was just nobody here to really give you much help. Very little infrastructure, very little industry infrastructure. All of it was geared toward onshore and almost no offshore. We lived on the rig, on the Glomar 2, and in hotel rooms when we were on shore. We worked roughly 30 days on and 7 days off. We worked 30 days on the Glomar 2 before we got a chance to go home. Some days we'd work more. Sometimes the operation would be going badly when my time came about to go home. And my relief foreman was a guy named Paul Martin. And he was an old experienced foreman, but he knew very little about offshore. Paul Martin was nervous when I started packing up my suitcase, getting ready to go home and take some days off. And if he had anything to do or whatever, I had to go over it with him really thoroughly before I left and make sure that he felt comfortable with it. Well, I went back to California. I took an airplane and flew back to Los Angeles, and then I'd rent a car in Los Angeles and drive back to Ojai, where we lived, north of Ventura. Well, that was way down the road. That was several years down the road. That was after we made the discovery. We drilled a duster the first year. I say a duster, it would have been a pretty good gas well probably, but gas wasn't worth anything offshore in those days. Offshore gas was not worth bringing in, and so we abandoned that well and moved to Middle Ground Shoal, where we in 1963. When we came back in 1963, we drilled the discovery well. We had to leave out of here in 1962. We had to leave and go back to California, where the rig could be used offshore California, but it couldn't be used at Cook Inlet because of the ice. The rig was not ice strengthened, or neither was were the supply boats or any of our other floating equipment. So we had to leave before ice formed in the inlet. First discovery we made in 1963. We drilled at Ground Shoal. We drilled down, and of course we knew we were in oil sand. We had a logging unit on the platform, and we were catching samples by the foot, and we could see the glow of the oil on the samples, and we started making plans to complete the well in a fashion that would allow us to perform a formation test on it when it was completed. And so that we did. We finished logging operations and sidewall samples and all this kind of thing, and then wound up running a casing and cementing the casing all the way, and I think we went back and perforated where we wanted to test. And we tested from the bottom up, and we'd perforate a zone and test it, and then perforate another zone and test it, and so on. That was the plan. And we set our packer and perforated the first zone, and we'd also set up a production facility on a barge. I'm getting ahead of myself here. We set up a production facility on a barge that we brought in and tied up alongside the Glomar. This barge was a pretty big barge. It was a 100-foot barge, probably 70, 80-foot barge anyway, and it had a production tank on it, 500-barrel Baker tank on it, and it had production facilities that we'd borrowed from Chevron at Swanson River, and we had production personnel that we'd borrowed from Chevron at Swanson River. We had them here to handle oil production as it came on board, and also to advise us drilling personnel. We knew that we had oil down there because we'd run the logs, we'd drilled the well, we'd seen what the cuttings looked like. We knew we were in oil sand, and we'd run the logs, and the logs showed oil sand in quite a number of places. And so we knew we had oil sand, we knew we had oil. We didn't know how much, though. We had no idea of what the quality was or the quantity of oil that we had. And so we had to perform a production test in order to find that out. And so to accomplish that, we ran this liner and prepared to run a full-scale production test. And we rigged up the flow line from the rig floor down to the barge, where the tank was mounted on the barge, and ran it through a gas separator and the production facility that was mounted on the barge, and into the tank, and after the packer sat on the production test tool and the well started to produce, it just seemed to take forever for the oil to surface. And nothing happened for a long time. And several of the production hands said, well, you got to be patient. You got to be real patient here, because sometimes it takes these things a long time to happen. And soon the well began to flow a little bit. Then it began to flow more and more. And pretty soon it was burping oily water from the fluid we'd left in the tubing. And pretty soon the oily water turned to oil. And pretty soon the oil started gushing out in huge bubbles and bursts, and that would shake the flow lines, and we had to tie the flow lines down and secure the flow lines, and we had, of course, seamen wandering all over the rig with Draeger gas detectors, trying to detect gas at any places it should not be, and setting up vent fans to blow air in around and keep the gas from collecting anywhere where it might cause an explosion or fire. The amount of oil surprised me. It surprised a lot of people that were conducting the test, even more than myself. To my amazement, it surprised the hell out of the shell geologists, and the further the test went, the more surprised everybody got, the better it looked. And pretty soon we all realized that, man, we had a real oil well on our hands, there, and this well was really coming in, and we let it flow for, I don't know, a day or so into the tank. We had to shut everything down while we took the barge ashore and dumped the oil, took it to shore to RS dock, and pumped the oil into tank trucks and hauled it to Swanson River Field and disposed of it at Swanson River Field, sold it actually, put it in their pipeline, and then brought the barge back out offshore and tied it up alongside the rig with an empty 500-barrel tank. And then we opened up the well and started producing again. And the well produced even better after it was opened up the second time. I don't remember exactly how long we produced the well. I don't remember exactly how much oil it made, but I'll say that we produced around 400 barrels of oil at least out of that well during the test. And of course that was all taken to Swanson River Field and pumped into their pipeline. And we were very nervous. I was a drilling hand. I knew nothing about production at the time, and was really nervous with all the gas and oil that we were handling. The gas was going to a flare unit, and the gas it wasn't being flared, but it was being piped off in the atmosphere and discharged in the atmosphere, and our only hope was that all the gas was going that way and not collecting in some unknown spot aboard the ship where a spark could ignite it. That was as safe as we could make it in that day and age, but it would not be acceptable and by today's standards. It wouldn't be acceptable by my standards today. We could not run a test like that. But we did in those days, and in those days we ran enough of a test to decide that we had a oil-producing structure, and that we had enough oil in the structure to justify a platform. And we made the decision right there, I think maybe even before we closed the test tool, that we were going to order a platform. And we had a platform all designed and actually on file with Kaiser Steel at the time. And we called down to Kaiser Steel and pulled the trigger on that and caused Kaiser Steel to start work on that platform that same year. We've pulled the tester loose, killed the well. We abandoned the well, safely abandoned the well permanently abandoning it. Not that we couldn't go back in and re-drill it, and clean it out and make a producing well out of it, but we did cement up the whole well, and we left the wellhead on it though, with the master valve and swab valve both closed. And we moved the rig off and moved the rig up to North Cook, and started work on another well. And we got, before winter set in and we had to move the rig out of Cook Inlet, we got 9 5/8 casing set around 5,000 feet in North Cook on a well in North Cook Inlet. And we created a mooring nest up there for the Glomar, and and started a well and took it down to protective casing depth, which was 9 5/8 casing at, I don't know, 5,000 or 6,000 feet, something like that. And we set casing, cemented it, and then we demobed the rig and let go of our mooring nest and sailed off back to California for the winter. We came back the next year and remoored in that mooring, that same mooring nest. The next year was after the earthquake. And the earthquake didn't do any damage to any of the moorings. It didn't move the wellhead, didn't do any damage to the well, did no damage to anything to do with the rig operation at Cook Inlet. We re-anchored the rig in its 1963 mooring nest, and we re-entered the well and created a mud system and went ahead and cleaned out the cement and drilled out the bottom of the casing and started drilling ahead. And went ahead and drilled a well down to, I can't remember what depth now, 8,000 or 9,000 feet, and found oil there too. And then after that, we moved the rig to South Cook Inlet and drilled some wells in South Cook Inlet, and I became drilling superintendent after that, and was in charge of installing Platform A. Platform A was on its way up by the end of 1963. We saw Platform A come up 62, 63. By the end of 1964, Platform A was on its way. And Glomar 2 was working in South Cook Inlet. I was working out of the Anchorage office, and we had Glomar 2 working in South Cook, and Platform A came up, was towed up to Middle Ground Shoal by the big tow company out of Seattle. At this point, I was just being transferred to Alaska, and we bought a house we didn't buy a house where I would have bought a house earlier because of the earthquake and our experience with the earthquake. I bought a house in College Village, and it was an unfinished house, and I moved my family up here. The house was not finished, and we rented a little house in a neighborhood just southeast of Lake Otis and Tudor, the intersection of Lake Otis and Tudor, which was a pretty wild and woolly intersection in those days. There was nothing but gravel trucks out there. And the family lived in that little rental house until our house in College Village was finished. Then we moved into it. I think Anchorage had a population of 45 to 50,000 then. I think that's right. and the outskirts of Anchorage were, I can tell you right now, Sears Roebuck was almost new. The guy that ran Sears was just moved to Alaska, and he was living, I think, also in College Village. And what school did you go to, Ray?
Rogers Park.
Rogers Park School. And the school had only been open a couple of 3 years. Rogers Park was a little residential neighborhood right near the school, right kind of around the school and towards town from College Village. The kids used to have to walk to school from our house through the woods, through Rogers Park and on to school. It was a pretty wild and woolly walk, I guess, some of the time. Yeah, and I was working in Cook Inlet, that's right, and we were working on rigging up Platform A, and we got rid of Kaiser Steel early on, about the time I started thinking about moving up here, started looking for a house to buy, and we got rid of Kaiser Steel. We sent them on their merry way, and we put our own people out on the platform, and that's when the platform really started coming together. And we had remodeled one of the rigs from Ventura to go on this platform, and one of the guys that I worked with out there was one of the main designers of the rig, and he came up and spent quite a bit of time building that rig, putting that rig together on Platform A. And the division mechanical engineer was a guy named Dillard Hammett, and Dillard Hammett later became an executive with Sedco. And but at that particular time, he was my engineering affiliate. I was drilling superintendent, and he was division engineer. And he designed the quarters and was involved in installing the quarters and a lot of the production facilities. And I was involved in installing the drilling rig and the drilling equipment, and later on finishing up on installation of the production equipment and production facilities. Well, there's a lot of water went under the bridge between those two times. First, I got transferred out of here back in 1967 and went back to Houston and then on to New Orleans, where I went to the Offshore Division and worked in the Offshore Division from 69 to about 76. And then I came back up here in 1976 with the Sedco 706 that drilled out in the Gulf of Alaska. And we drilled a couple of wildcats in the Gulf of Alaska. And I moved the family back up in 76. We came back up and moved into a house in Bayshore. And we drilled wells in we drilled a well in the Gulf of Alaska, and it was a duster, and a very disappointing duster, because we found that the geology we were looking for had apparently moved on beyond us due to continental drift, or something like that. I had about a 2-hour session with one of our vice presidents by the name of Tom Hart, who explained that to me one time. The Gulf of Alaska didn't turn out to be anything. And so I was scheduled to be moved back to New Orleans, and we actually put our house up for sale here, and had gotten an offer on the house, and I had actually put an offer in on a house in New Orleans. When they called me on the telephone one morning, I was sitting in the office in Alaska, and they said, "Are you getting ready to go to Houston?" And I said, "Yeah." "Or New Orleans?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." And they said, "Well, scratch it." So we want you to stay in Alaska. What? I said, "Jesus, I've sold my house." And they said, "Well, see what you can do to unsell it, and see what you can do to unbuy that house that you bought in New Orleans, and we'll take care of you, and you can settle back down to the job of production superintendent in Alaska. We want you to become a production superintendent up there, and we want a production guy up there that is capable of handling drilling wells." And I had a choice. I could have said, "No, I don't want to do that," but that wasn't me. I mean, I wanted to stay in Alaska. I'm an Alaskan. I got to where I just loved Alaska, and I wanted to stay here. So I stayed, and I elected to stay and take the job, and that's what I did. The rest is history. I took the job of production superintendent, and it was pretty quiet for a couple of years. But then the noise started. You could hear the drum beating in the distance. The exploration people were getting more intense about the Beaufort Sea and about operating in the Beaufort and about looking for prospects in the Beaufort Sea. I was really impressed with the degree of civilization that ARCO and BP had created up there. I thought they had really done a hell of a job of manipulating Mother Nature and the oil field infrastructure to create an oil field and a pretty good infrastructure for other companies to come in and utilize. I felt reasonably confident because the Beaufort Sea was a huge area, and there had been very few wells drilled out there, and I was anxious to get out there and see our exploration people drill some wells. And we soon contracted Canmar to do the drilling for us, and Canmar, Canadian Marine, came over, and they proved to be a very, very effective contractor, one of the best contractors I've ever worked with in my life. Canmar has had some fantastic people and a lot of knowledge about operating in the Arctic. And we made every effort to utilize every bit of experience Canmar could offer us. And I think we did a pretty good job of it. We brought over one of the Canmar rigs anyway, and icebreaker, brought over a couple of icebreakers, and they had fantastic icebreakers, and they could handle the Beaufort Sea like it was somebody's backyard in the middle of summer. I mean, they just had that way about them. The Canadians were really knowledgeable, and we drilled a number of wells out there in the 1980s. I think we drilled maybe 15 or 20 wells. Can't remember now. Out there in the 1980s. I had a drilling superintendent up here. His name was Monty Wood. He was a good drilling man out of Mississippi. And we drilled a lot of wells and we didn't find a thing. And when I say that we didn't find a thing, that's not quite true. We found some gas, and we found some evidence of that petroleum had at least been passing through the formation. And we shut everything down in the 80s, and it wasn't until after I had retired in the 90s, actually in the mid-2000s, that Shell was successful in another lease sale in the Beaufort Sea and bought a lot of the same leases that we had evaluated in the Beaufort and the Chukchi, and planned to go back and drill them again. Of course, by this time, Canmar was out of business, and Shell didn't have that option to fall back on. And so I have no real knowledge of who they looked at as contractors, but they wound up drilling one well up there, enough to find out that that their new look on the geology was not really a correct one. Building Platform A and Platform C were big accomplishments, and finding Middle Ground Shoal Field was a good accomplishment. Making a discovery at Seal Island. We drilled a discovery well at Seal Island, even though we didn't develop it, and it wasn't developable by itself. So Shell had to sell that prospect to somebody that had other prospects up there that they could combine with that and develop it, and which they did. And I think they sold it to Emerald Hess, and I can't remember now. I don't think Mr. Hess ever developed the field. I think that they, in turn, I don't know whether they sold their interest or whether they maintained their interest and turned the operatorship over to someone else who has since, I think, developed the same reserves that we discovered at Seal Island. One thing I didn't mention was back in the days of drilling the discovery well on Platform A, Amoco had 2 blowouts at Cook Inlet. Wow. And this made us exceedingly nervous and really created a lot more stomach acid for us while we were running the production test on Platform, or on the Middle Ground Shoal. They had a blowout in North Cook Inlet. They had the Wanico 2, which was a floating drilling barge drilling in North Cook Inlet, and they took a kick at something like 10,000 feet, and their drilling mud was a couple of pounds light, and the kick, of course, they used surface pressure to control the kick, and with pressure on the wellhead and the tides, the wellhead started leaking. And once it started leaking, it was Katie bar the door. The well got away from it and cut out, just like he'd taken a welder's torch and cut out the tubing encasing surrounding the well, and blew the blowout preventer stack up through the rig floor, created a big bubble of water and gas that floated the drill barge. The drill barge slid off the side of that thing. I don't think it hurt anybody. By the grace of God, I don't think it hurt anyone. And they had a blowout there that blew wild. It blew wild, and they lit it afire. It was a gas blowout. It blew wild for over a year. They moved the rig off to the side. They put the rig back together, got it all cleaned up, and remoored it off to the side and started drilling a relief well. That well fire burnt all winter long. That winter, burnt all the next year, and finally the following fall, I think it was, they were pumping on the relief well, pumping mud down into the relief well, into the casing of the blowout, and up the casing, and they were pumping mud fast so that they could kill the blowout, and the fire went out, and I guess they started pumping cement around and cemented it off and this kind of thing afterwards. I have no memory of how they secured that, but that was in like 1965. At that same time, that well got away from them. They had a hotshot drilling engineer in Denver that wanted them to change over to water and drilling their middle ground shoal well. And they were down deeper than we were at the time. And they changed over from mud to water, is my understanding. I'm not sure that I'm correct on that point, but changed over from mud to water at about, 3,500 feet or something like that. And the well came in on them. And when it did, they tried to control it from the surface. The surface pressure became too great, and the well blew out at the shoe of the surface casing. And the blowout from the shoe of the surface casing came back up to the surface and started blowing out in the middle of the ocean, and it formed like a coral atoll out there in the middle of the water. You'd have, on the one hand, you had the little platform here with Abaco's rig on it. And out here away from the platform, you had this atoll of mud, circular atoll of mud, in the middle of which was this blowing out well that was blowing out in the middle of it. And that was happening, on this kind of on the south side of us. So we had a blowout on the north, had a blowout on the south, and we were all pretty nervous. Oh man, it's like night and day. Back in the 50s or the 60s when I first came up here, this was like backwoods country, and Chevron's field out at there on the Kenai Peninsula was the big oil field in those days, and Chevron had Swanson River field. No, that's Swanson River field. They had I can't remember the name of the field on the north side of Cook Inlet now, but that shows how what getting old will do to your memory. But anyway, Chevron did operate on the north side of Cook Inlet in those days, but they didn't have anything really major over there. And the only thing major Chevron had was Swanson River. And that was the only thing really major in Alaska at that time. And Richfield was drilling wildcats up in the Arctic, and Richfield had a way of hanging on, and not giving up. Thank God they did, and found Prudhoe Bay Field. If it hadn't been for finding Prudhoe Bay Field and developing Prudhoe Bay Field, Alaska would still be kind of a barely survivable climate as far as the economy is concerned. Today, of course, you got to bear in mind that with the change of administration, the oil industry's outlook has really turned downward, but that may change, and the oil industry may start to look up again, and I think Alaska still holds prospects for oil discovery and oil development. I think there are still oil fields to be found here and oil development to be done, but not like there was back in, when Prudhoe Bay was discovered. I retired in 1990 as operations manager for Shell here, and we had a pretty good operation going. We had a 2 or 3 year safety record on the platforms, and both platforms were producing more oil and gas than they had for previous years. We had, at the time I retired, we still had some exploratory hopefuls out there that we were hoping to look at, and things really looked up, The reason I retired was because Shell drilled another disappointing well in the Chukchi. That's first go round. This is the first go round now, mind you. Back in the 80s, in the late 80s, we drilled another dry hole, and I just decided that, by God, this is it. I think I'm going to pull the pin and collect my retirement and retire here at Shell while I'm still young enough to work on my fish camp and fish and enjoy my family.